The second lesson for this morning comes from the book of Numbers. I will tell you at the outset, this is one of the more challenging and maybe uncomfortable sections in the Torah, but we'll talk about that in just a little bit. From Mount Hor, they set out by the way to the Red Sea, to go around to the land of Edom, but the people became impatient on the way. The people spoke against God and against Moses. "Why have you brought us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and we detest this miserable food." Then the Lord sent poisonous serpents among the people, and they bit the people, so that many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, "We have sinned by speaking against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord to take the serpents from us." So Moses prayed for the people. And the Lord said to Moses, "Make a poisonous serpent, set it on a pole, and everyone who is bitten shall look at it and live." So Moses made a serpent of bronze and put it on a pole, and whenever a serpent bit someone, the person would look at the serpent of bronze and live. Well, good morning. I want to thank First Presbyterian Church for inviting me to be here this morning. It is always an honor and a privilege. And I will tell you, standing up here, this is the only time in my life I ever feel tall. So I really enjoy this. You know that Kevin and Wendy and the girls were in Denver last night for Joanna's senior recital. And the recital was on live stream for those of you who are on Facebook. If you go to any of the Fleming pages, and there are quite a few of them on Facebook, you can see the stream. But to me, the most touching moment was towards the end of the recital. Joanna had asked her father to play the piano during one of the final pieces. And Kevin goes on stage with his red socks and red tie, the wrong Red Sox, let me just say that, but and plays beautifully, and she sings beautifully. It's a very, very touching moment. Well, you all know that your pastor is one of my dearest friends on this earth, and I do love it when we get an opportunity to preach in each other's pulpit, and usually our sermons are tied to some sort of prescribed specific scriptural passage. And I will admit, the last couple of summers that Kevin has spoken at Tabby, he has not inherited what I would call the choicest of fruits of biblical passages to speak on. So, this week he goes away. He asked me to preach about snakes on a pole. And a passage that seems to almost talk about witchcraft and magic. So you can be sure that I am very carefully planning our pulpit swap for this summer. And I'm going to go home and look at the prescribed Torah readings before we set that date in stone. This is an unusual week of scriptural readings for both Jews and Presbyterians. For Jews, you know that we follow the weekly cycle of Torah. We start chronologically with the book of Genesis right after our fall holidays. So that means that we're actually in the book of Exodus at the very end of Exodus on the calendar of readings. But there are a few Shabbats during the year where we're told to read a second portion of Torah that relates to wherever we might be on the holiday calendar. And we are now just about 3 weeks out from the holiday of Passover. So, this past Shabbat had a name. It was called Shabbat Parah. Parah is the biblical red heifer, the story of which, coincidentally, is actually in the same section of Torah as this week's reading on the Presbyterian calendar. Now, the additional reading for us this past weekend dealt with the red heifer, whose ashes were combined with water to purify anyone who had been in contact with a dead person, because only people who were pure could offer and eat from the Passover sacrifice. So a public announcement was made, and people were told to purify themselves before making their Passover pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Why a red heifer? We don't really know. We're never told. How do ashes from a slaughtered animal and water purify someone who's been in touch with a corpse? We have no idea. The story of the red heifer comes, as I said, in the same section of Torah as this story of the bronze snake that we just read. Now, the passage from the lectionary about the bronze snake seems to predate Greek mythology. It might very well be a source for what comes to be an association of healing. We've all been into physician offices and we've seen the staff with the snake winding around it, and probably its origins are the passage that we just read. But both the portion that we read in temple about the red heifer and this portion about the bronze snake have an almost uncomfortable reliance on what seems to be magic, bordering on what many historically have seen as witchcraft. So how do we know that this really isn't witchcraft? Well, for we Jews, we look to the words of the Talmud and we try to see what wisdom the rabbis gave us with regard to what they suspected to be witchcraft. Now, here's what the rabbis said we were to do if anything seemed like witchcraft. Please remember this was written thousands of years ago. What they said to do was, may boiling excrement be forced into your mouth, those who are witches. May your head go bald and carry off your crumbs, your spices be scattered, and the wind carry off the new saffron in your hands, O witches. So let's just say the rabbis weren't real fond of witchcraft and witches. But we also read in the book of Exodus, chapter 22, you shall not tolerate a sorceress. And in Leviticus 20, it says, a man or woman who claims to have a ghost or familiar spirit shall be put to death. They shall be pelted with stones. So we can see that there was discomfort with anything that would be magic or witchcraft. So the ritual of the red heifer and the staring at the bronze snake on the staff has to be something different than witchcraft. The rabbis said, could a snake on the pole cause death by not looking at it, or give life just by looking at it? Rather, the rabbis said, at the time Israel would look at the snake, they would actually look upward and subject their heart to their Father who was in heaven. Then they would be cured. But if not, they would waste away. So here's the lesson, as I see it, in this obscure passage. When we transgress, when we choose to turn away from God, and the children of Israel did that by their complaining, their lack of appreciation for everything that God did for them. When we do that, our choice always has very real and inescapable consequences. The choices that we make change and distort reality, either inside or outside of us, and oftentimes both. And although these changes are not always as visible as they are in this scriptural lesson, we learn later that when the consequences of our transgressions inevitably begin to bite us, and there's the analogy to the snake, it's then that we start crying out to God, begging God to save us, to take away the metaphorical snakes in our lives, to take away the consequences of our own wrongdoing. But God doesn't simply restore things as if our choices never happened. God does not simply flick away our transgressions and the evil that are caused by them. So there in the wilderness, God offered his healing to everyone. However strange and unexpected it might have seemed to them, it was the only way to survive. It was the only way to be saved. Those who chose to look at the bronze serpent lived, and everyone else perished. Probably none of them understood. And I would suppose that Moses himself was puzzled and couldn't understand why he needed to do it. But this is exactly what faith is about, obeying God even when we don't understand. Faith needs to then be followed by action, a change in behavior. This will be what defines the Jewish religion from this point in the Bible that we just read to this very day. Judaism is a religion of action, not just prayer. God does not right the wrongs of society, but God requires that we do that. And as we read through the Bible, especially after the Torah and the books of prophets, we discover that God becomes increasingly remote. And we can't just pray for those who are sick, we're told. If we know that they're sick, we need to see what we can do to help ease the suffering and pain. For every prayer we offer, we need to ask, what can I do in addition to the prayer? All of us here today are God's representatives in this world. If we prefer, we are divine messengers who connect earth and heaven, and together we truly can transform the world. Rabbi Lawrence Kushner said, ordinary people are messengers of the Most High. We have the power to change the course of the world. Every moment is an opportunity for a miracle. But we learn that we are the ones who need to be ready to initiate it. And that might be the most important takeaway from the strange passages in the Torah that we are both prescribed to read this week.